haven't made a video in a while, so I don't know. Anyway, a couple of things that happens when people find out you're bipolar, or things that you find out when you're bipolar. So, okay, let's start with some. Okay, first of all, I'm bipolar type 2. I'm still doing some tests to exclude anything else, even though I was diagnosed 2 years ago. Okay, let's see. One thing that irks me the most is when people say shit like, the weather is so bipolar. I mean, like, you don't say things like, oh, the weather's so cancerous, or things like that, or the weather's so feverish. Just like, no, you don't talk about mental illnesses and the weather in one swift sentence. That's so annoying. And when people just like, oh my god, that person's like so bipolar, they're always angry and then they're sad and etc. That's not how bipolar works. It's not simple mood swings or simple hormonal changes. It's a lot more complicated than that, and it's really annoying when people compare it to the weather, because the weather's always crazy. Who cares if it's suddenly crazier than usual? Because that's how it is. And if you live in Australia like me, the weather's always fucking crazy. So yeah. Another thing that irks me is that you will always get different types of psychiatrists and psychologists. One of those kind are like the helpful ones, the ones who really just wants to help you progress. They don't care if that's via pills or therapy. They just want what's best for you. And finding a good psychiatrist or psychologist like that is extremely difficult. And someone who's cheap as well. So another one is the type that tells you that you don't need medication at all, and they don't even consider it, and they're just saying things like, oh, it's just hormonal, it's, you just love chaos, you're just trying to adapt. And sometimes that could be true, but it's also annoying because ha ha ha, that kind of talk's not going to like cure my suicidal tendencies, or oh, my wanting to jump out of a window because I think I can fly. So that kind of therapy does not help me, at least. There's also the therapy where it's just they want to just stuff you with pills, and it's like, not everyone wants medication. I mean, I wanted medication, but not everyone wants medication. Some people just like talking therapy. Some people just want to find out if there's a organic reason for this. But then there are those doctors who are just like, oh, here's the prescribed medication or whatever. One example was I got the psychiatrist who misdiagnosed me. How much did she misdiagnose me? Well, she said that I have depression and ADHD. I have a friend who has ADHD, and I'm nothing like her, but I guess it varies. But it was annoying because she was like, here you go, here are these depressants. Here's Lexapro, and those just make me hyper and really edgy and very manic, and yeah, that didn't help. And later, when I was diagnosed as bipolar, I was like, yeah, finally something that kind of makes sense. So you will have those psychiatrists who will overdiagnose you or misdiagnose you or underdiagnose you, and that's just a mess because mental illness is not a science yet. There are people who deny mental illness altogether and say it's just, oh, it's just quirky traits, we live with them, and that can be annoying, but it can also be true, but we don't know. Then there are those people who just thinks, oh, it's just medication, just take tons of medication because that's going to cure all your circumstances. And there are those people who think it's just talking therapy will help you. And I like talking to people, and I like talking to psychiatrists, but I don't like that being my only kind of therapy. So bipolar disorder has bipolar type 1, bipolar type 2, etc. And some will say, oh, you're this type, and some will say you're not this type. Some will not even tell you that there's a type, and it gets confusing from there. Also, some may mistake, like a doctor once was reading my diagnosis and said, "Oh, so you have depression." I'm like, "Oh, I have manic depression." And they're like, "Okay, depression. So you want antidepressants?" I'm like, "I have bipolar disorder, so I need mood stabilizers." They're like, "Oh, but we should just give you antidepressants." And I'm like, "It's not that simple." Because for some people, they get depressed more than they get manic. And for some people like me, I tend to be on that scale, but also I do get quite a bit manic episodes. So it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, it's not simply depression. It's not. There are also those people who think that bipolar disorder equals schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder or borderline disorder. Like, I've got asked, "Oh, you're bipolar? Does that mean you have multiple personalities?" And I'm like, "No, no, I don't. I don't." And, well, what other things that I've come across after being diagnosed with bipolar? That I hadn't found any good representation of bipolar in the media. I mean, I do like Emily Autumn, and she was bipolar, but she also has a bad rep. And it gets like, oh, everyone thinks that I'm equivalent to her, or I'll act like her. Because, I mean, there are bipolar people who end up just being creative and then just seeking creativity and just use that to express their mania. And they become quite successful, but then there are people like me who can't draw. So it's like, well, I'm not creative. I'm just manic and I think weird things sometimes. Yeah. And of course, everyone with a mental illness will get across those people like who says, "Why don't you just do yoga? Why don't you just like do something fun?" Maybe it's because it's not fun to me anymore. Maybe. Or you'll get those people who say things like, "Oh, homeless people and starving people have it worse." And I'm like, yeah, I know that they're suffering, but it's a different type of suffering. I'm still suffering. I know that they're suffering. And I hate it when this got told to me because I was homeless. And it's like, you're telling me I used to be homeless and I think my mental suffering was worse, but that's my opinion. Some people can disagree, some people can agree, well, whatever. Um, Other things is that also bipolar disorder has symptoms of, being promiscuous and being impulsive. And I'm very impulsive, but I'm not promiscuous. So I get asked a lot, like, back then when I was single and depressed and all that. And psychiatrists would ask, "Are you sexually active?" And I would be like, "No one wants to touch me." And and then they assume that I'm promiscuous. They're like, "Oh, do you not have a boyfriend um, because you want to have sex with tons of random people?" I'm like, "No, I don't want to have tons of sex with random people. One, I'm scared of STDs, and two, no." So yeah, those are just some things. What other things are really annoying? You will get those people, like, for example, if your grades are good. My grades weren't good. I mean, I got B's and C's and D's and things like that. And a teacher told me that, oh, she didn't even like notice that I was bipolar because my grades are so good and it hasn't affected my schooling. And I'm like, how's this supposed to help me? Is that encouragement? Because I don't really care. And yeah, and also, if you tell your school or education system that, hey, I'm bipolar, it differs from person to person. Some people have really vivid hallucinations, and then some people like me just gets depressed or manic now and then. So it's like, I don't want to tell the school, but my old school had this policy apparently that I had to tell them. So when I told them, they didn't accommodate it for me. Like, even though, hey, I self harm and, well, I used to self harm. Hey, I self harm and I'm depressed and missing days of school because I'm like sick of going to school and seeing people. No, let's not accommodate exams for me. Let's not accommodate anything. So some people expect special treatment, And sometimes they get special treatment, and I consider that good because I would have loved to have special treatment, like, hey, it's okay if you want to stay at home, we understand that you're depressed and you want to die, and in Taiwan there aren't really any places that you can go to because the suicide hotline's not 24/7. um so yeah. Also, being bipolar will depend from country to country. Like, it was extremely difficult in Taiwan. I mean, hello. I mean, I couldn't speak Chinese, and the suicide hotline wasn't 24/7, and it wasn't in English, so it was like, what am I doing? And yeah, but in Australia, it's quite good. There's psychiatrists, psychologists everywhere, and there are all these like helping programs and all that. And I think that's good because I know some places you can't actually afford to go to a psychiatrist or afford to go to a psychologist. That's really sad. I wish that counseling was at least free, and that's why. Yeah. Okay, next point. I realized that when I was diagnosed bipolar and I was all depressed and sad and just manic and I had all these mood changes, I started up a blog and I found that it helped. Everyone copes differently, and that blog helped me cope, and just going online helped me cope, and finding friends online. But I got a lot of like people saying things like, why don't you go outside? Why don't you hang out with your friends? And I'm like, hey, friends. And things like that. And I know some people get affected and triggered by blogs and images, but I didn't. It was actually quite helpful, and I realized that when I was diagnosed, I actually gave people advice more than I did when I wasn't diagnosed. And I just wanted to help people, especially people like me who struggle to like accept their diagnosis, to accept that it's who they are. And I'm still unsure because some psychiatrists tell me that it's ADHD, or that it's just depression, or that I'm just chaotic and I just like chaos, so I do chaos. Some people say, oh, it's from my circumstances, which could be true. And yeah, and then I'm getting blood tests done, as I said, and with mental illness, they don't necessarily do clinical medical exams because they don't necessarily need it because it's a mental thing. But sometimes you need it because you need to exclude things. Like, for example, my doctor today said that B12, like if I lack in the vitamin B12, that it could be the reason for me feeling depressed. Oh, so it could be a thyroid dysfunction or it could be a tumor, but I hope not. And yeah, so that's all I have to say, really. That it's not easy accepting your diagnosis. It's not easy dealing with misinformed people. It's not easy dealing with people who think you can just will it away, or with any mental illness that you can suddenly like do yoga or like sing or like go out with your friends and everything will be better, because that's not what it's like. And yeah, okay, that's all I have to say. So bye.